Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here today as we take an inside look at living on a razor's edge. Scott Hall story. This one was released a little while ago, and I was able to pick it up on one of the WWE shop deals. I think I paid $15 for it, which, isn't that bad of a deal when it comes down to it to watch the Scott Hall documentary. As of right now, it's not up on the WWE Network. But I'm sure it'll be up on there sooner than later. My plus to getting this Scott Hall Razor Ramon DVD is the matches that are going to come with it, as well as getting the documentary story. Scott Hall is an interesting pick to make a DVD on. Of course, he was a member of the NWO. He was a member of the struggling but still striving WWF in those early 1990 years, which are sort of dark days to look back upon. But if you were in my age range and you remember watching WWF back then, Razor Ramon is one of those guys that you're not going to let go of. And he was a big part of the wrestling boom by leaving and going to WCW, starting the NWO with him, Kevin Nash, and Hulk Hogan, Eric Bischoff writing the coattails as well, putting all the deals together. I will tell you honestly that, I'm a little bit scared for this documentary release. I'm thinking that, with the Click rules coming out last year, as well as 2 separate NWO DVDs, plus all of the times the NWO has been covered in the Rise and Fall of WCW, and the Starrcade DVD, and a whole bunch of other ones. How much of this stuff is really going to be played out that we've seen over and over again? And plus, Scott Hall was just recently featured, I believe, last year in the, it wasn't a 30 for 30, but it was an ESPN sort of documentary story about the life of him. Very cool looking discs, one white, one yellow. We'll take a peek at what's going on underneath the covers down here. I always sort of make these hard to read underneath there. A whole bunch of vignettes from back in the day. Some stories. The matches. Let's get down to the matches. Some stuff from Mid-Atlantic. I'm guessing that's when he was wrestling as the Cowboy, Scott Hall, with that Magnum PI, Tom Selleck-like stash that he had back in the day with the hairy chest. Here he is in the corner with Scott Hall. Scott Hall and Kurt Hennig. That was a big tag team back in the day. It's probably when they win the AWA Tag Team Championships right there. Then we see him coming into WCW as the Diamond Stud, going up against Tommy Rich. The Diamond Exchange. We see Superstars, must be his debut in WWF. His WWE Championship match at the Royal Rumble, going up against Bret Hart in 1993. Bret Hart versus the Kid. Probably when they do the thing where 1, 2, 3 Kid beats Razor Ramon. Big surprise. And then we see Shawn versus Razor for the Intercontinental title. We see Razor versus Rick DeMalta Martel, where he wins the Intercontinental Championship. Of course, the WrestleMania 10 ladder match for the Intercontinental title, Razor Ramon versus Shawn Michaels. Probably goes down as one of the best matches that he ever had, changing the game. First mainstream ladder match, I guess you can say, that they ever had. Then we have the rematch, Intercontinental Championship match at SummerSlam of 94. Razor, no, I apologize, this isn't the rematch, this is Razor versus Diesel, where Walter Payton was outside. Then we have Razor versus Jeff Jarrett at the Rumble 95, Razor versus Goldust at the Rumble 96. Lots of Rumble matches on there for Razor Ramon. Then we see him in WCW, the Outsiders versus Sting and Luger, the Outsiders versus Harlem Heat from Halloween Havoc, Scott Hall versus Scott Steiner, Scott Hall versus Chris Jericho, Scott Hall versus Sting for the championship in Uncensored. That was after he won the World War III, after Hogan eliminated himself, after Sting, a.k.a. Kevin Nash, came down from the rafters. Scott Hall got the win, which enabled him to have a championship match, which they kept pushing back, which inevitably ended up being part of the reason why the NWO was split into 2 groups, because Scott Hall kept on having to take the backseat to Hogan. The Outsiders versus Goldberg and Sid. Then we have Scott Hall versus The Rock on SmackDown. Scott Hall versus Stone Cold Steve Austin at WrestleMania 18, which it won't be the end of Scott Hall's career, but he was released shortly after that, after the trip over to England on the plane ride from hell. And, even though he popped up in TNA here and there along the way, nothing that ever really sort of mattered anymore after that. Sort of sad, but then we go to the Blu-ray exclusives. We got the Diamond Stud and Oz, which would become the Outsiders, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, come 1996. Razor Ramon and Jim Powers. Razor Ramon versus the $1 Million Man at SummerSlam 93. Razor Ramon versus Jeff Jarrett and the Roadie 2-1-1 from In Your House. Scott Hall versus Bam Bam Bigelow. And then, of course, the Razor Ramon Hall of Fame induction from the WrestleMania 30 weekend in New Orleans. Living on a Razor's Edge, the Scott Hall story. This looks like it's going to be a really good one. Scott Hall, WWE Universe, WWE, Razor Ramon, NWO. A lot of pictures in there with his buddies. We see 1-2-3 Kid. We see Diesel. Surprise. Is that Sean? I can't tell if that's Sean or not. That's Brett. Pretty sure that's Brett. But, yeah, him and all his buddies there. And it looks like that's Luger. Right there with the Intercontinental straps looking like $1 million. It's going to be a good one right here. Scott Hall, one of the best.